Let's get the ball rolling. Lorna, could you give us a little bit about your background in publishing and the author world?
Yeah. So I have been in the author world since like 2012, 2013, back when it was like the Wild West and it was create space still. And, like single moms were buying houses with their books. And I mean, you can still obviously make quite a bit. But from your publishing, but back then it was just like crazy. It was like the new frontier, right? Of like, oh my gosh, we can self-publish. We don't have to go through a traditional publisher, get an agent. So I was an executive assistant for an entrepreneur who was also an author for 2 years. He was traditionally published and self-published. He had several books out. And so I got to see kind of like both sides of how like traditional publishing works, having an agent, negotiation, all of that, and then the indie side of things where you do it yourself. And I fell in love with self-publishing and indie publishing through that process. I didn't have a great experience watching and working with some of the traditional publishers, and so I was kind of like, you know what, indie publishing's this is awesome. Like, cool, stick it to the man. Like, let's go. Let's just do this thing ourselves, and keep all your royalties, be able to have whatever cover you want, and not have to like be forced to switch out to a cover you hate. And so I really fell in love with the world then. Have several years experience being a virtual assistant to several entrepreneurs. Dave Chesson, creator of Kindlepreneur, Atticus, publisher Rocket. I was his executive assistant for 4 years. And so I saw quite a bit behind the scenes, learned a ton from that experience. And all of that has kind of culminated in what I do today, which is running an agency, a virtual assistant agency. Recently, I've forayed into teaching what I know, which is helping authors, building systems, becoming organized so they can scale their business, kind of helping them get out of their own way, so they can get their books and art out into the world. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's been a lot. It's been a wild ride, but I am a huge book nerd myself. I love to read. And my husband is also an indie author. He writes space opera, primarily. He's also dipping his toes into fantasy. He was just telling me about like a Western fantasy idea he has the other day that I'm really excited about. So, and he is not a naturally organized person. He's very type B. So he's kind of my guinea pig with things where like, hey, what if you tried this? Would this work? Or hey, have you thought about this? And so I find a lot of creatives are very type B. So I have like a soft spot, I think, for that combo of being a creative and being like a type B person. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
Awesome. So when you first get started working with someone, I mean everyone is messy in their own ways, right?
Yes. Yes.
Um, so some people might need more help here, some people might need more help there. Usually, what are the go-to areas that you are helping an author with when getting started, getting organized?
Yeah, I love that question. And honestly, it's different for every person. I always tell folks, like, what are your top three things that are really stressing you out? And it's really interesting. Like, some authors hate social media. And so they're like, please, please, please help me with my social media. Other authors are like, I love doing social media. That's where I connect with my readers, that's where I find inspiration. So I want to keep social media on my plate, but could you help me with responding to emails, some project management? Could you help me with newsletter swaps, sending out my newsletter, coordinating book signings? I mean, there's so many things on an author's plate. And so it really is different for each author. And I always encourage people start with what you're not good at, right? So like if you're not good at designing covers, like I am not great with graphic design. I tell all my clients that up front. Like, let's create a template you like, and you approve, and we can tweak that and twist that. But whatever is your like weakness, start with delegating that and keep the things you A, enjoy doing, or B, are good at doing, and like delegate the rest as much as you can.
when it comes to when it comes to like adding stuff, because I feel like this is an area where a lot of people, want to do something as well as like, maybe they're not currently doing any social media at all, and they want to do social media, and hire someone to help them with that. Is that a good idea? Like, I feel like it could go sort of either way where because it's not something that they've personally handled, they're not exactly sure how to delegate.
Yeah.
And it could be the other way around where like the person who they have hired is already really good at it and knows exactly what to do, doesn't need any guidance and can just handle all of that. So like
Yeah.
where do you find is a good place to start for authors figuring out what they can and should delegate to begin with?
Yeah, no, that's important. Well, in social media in particularly, I always encourage authors like where are your readers hanging out at? Are they on Facebook? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Instagram? Are they on Threads? Like really get to know your readers and your ideal audience and focus on that platform there. YouTube is another one. Like people are reposting their reels onto shorts because they're finding there's a lot of booktubers out there and a lot of readers go to YouTube to find like recommendations and such. So I always encourage authors like pick one platform and start studying it. And if you want help with it and you want to hire an assistant with it, have a little bit of a plan so you can have some SOPs, which are standards of operation. So it's basically just a written way of doing things. So I post, like a fun backstory about one of my characters on Mondays. I post a little sneak peek into my work in progress on Tuesdays. On Wednesdays, I post something personal. On Thursday, I post my own book recommendation. Have a little bit of a game plan because just like throwing it onto someone's lap and saying, "Here, you figure this out." I've never seen that go well. And you have to remember, like, this is your business and you get to call the shots and you get to decide what do you want your social media to look like. I always recommend too, if you don't have an author branding, um, definitely go ahead and get one made up. You can also use Canva. There's amazing templates, palettes on Canva that you can use that fit your aesthetic, your vibe, what a lot of your books are about, especially if you write under a pen name. But definitely have a little bit of a plan before you go and offload it to someone else, especially an assistant. There's lots of assistants out there that specialize in social media for authors, but typically they're very genre specific. So there's a lot of romance assistants, there's a lot of fantasy assistants that specialize in those genres. So they know like what Facebook groups readers are hanging out in. They know what Discord servers readers are hanging out in. They kind of know where those pockets of the internet are that you can maybe get some more readers from and encourage you to start posting there. But that's, I think, a good place to start is setting your assistant up for success with having some of those basics in place first.
And someone asks in the chat, what do you mean by author branding? So, what are those sort of basics that you would be designing in Canva or having
Yeah.
sort of templates for?
Yeah, I would say for sure a logo. Just like you don't have to go crazy on the logo. It can be very simple. It can be like your pen name, it can be your pen name's initials, and then your colors. So, even if you write a couple different series, like there's probably similarities across those series. So I know, like, I have a friend, her name's Lizzie. She writes monster romance, and her books are very bright and colorful and fun. And they're like kind of comic book colors, I want to say, where they're just like that vivid brightness. So, like, when people think about you as an author, what do you want them to feel, right? Like, do you write like gothic horror and do you want them, is your vibe like moody and mysterious? Like, sit down and think about that. Like, how do you want people to feel when they think about you as an author? You can kind of reverse engineer from there. Well, these colors can match that, and this logo matches that. That's always a really good place to start. My husband had his branding created by Mibble Art. They do covers, but they also do author branding as well. And we were blown away with what they came up with. It is really cool. And I think he gave them like little direction. He was like, I want it to feel like Brandon Sanderson and Robin Hobb, because those are like his two authors and the types of books he likes to write, fantasy and sci-fi. And they came up with a really cool logo and like nailed the colors. So you can hire that out too to Mibble Art. It's pretty affordable as well.
That's awesome. Having them do a whole thing for you can be extremely valuable, especially if you're an author that is not familiar with like graphic design tools like Canva or doing any of that kind of stuff. What are the various places that you would use your author branding? So we mentioned like you might have that as like a banner image or something maybe on your social media, or what are some of the other places that you might incorporate that branding into your various,
Yeah.
platforms?
Yeah, so for sure, social media, so whenever you make posts, you're like, okay, I've got these fonts I really like to use, these colors. Your website for sure, like that can make building a website so much easier if you have a little bit of direction with colors, fonts, logos, graphics, things like that. Even if you do like newsletter swaps, like you can say, hey, here's my author logo, here's the cover, include it if you want to. Really, anywhere that's going to be a touch point for your readers. I heard something the other day that like someone has to see an ad 7 times before they finally buy something and before they finally like recognize it. And I think your author branding can kind of help establish that a little bit too. And again, if you're working with an assistant, that gives them a ton of direction as to like, hey, can you, whip up a newsletter for me? They have a direction already with the colors, the logo, all of that, and they can kind of take that and run with it. So, yeah, kind of helps you give that not just professionalism, but just that basis for like establishing who you are as an author and again like how you want your readers and people to feel when they encounter your branding and such. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm a little bit contrary when it comes to like designing newsletters. Like I very much want my emails to feel like my newsletters to feel like I am writing them to you personally. I feel like that's one of the superpowers that like solopreneurs, like, authors or, indie developers like myself kind of have
Mhm.
that companies don't have, which is that, companies are sort of like faceless,
Yes, very corporate.
right, very corporate. So like my newsletters, I always try to keep them feeling very, very personal. So I do
Mhm.
feel like there's that balance that you have to strike there as an
Yeah,
author, where you
absolutely.
don't want to come off as too corporate, too faceless, too aloof or distant.
Yeah.
Um, but you can still like incorporate those branding elements too. So it's you just there's a little bit of a balancing act there.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
for me, one of the things that I do also is like in my newsletters, and I don't know if everybody likes it or if other people don't like it specifically. They're like, this is you shouldn't do this, Evan. But I always say like, hey, someone's like, hey, first name or whatever, and start off my newsletter that way. Like a lot of people will start off a newsletter with like, hey, gang, or hey, peeps, or hey, whatever. And address it like it's to a group. But I always recommend always having the newsletter written like you're just addressing the individual. So anyway, sorry, that is my tangent about including branding in newsletters and stuff. But let's talk about let's take a step back here because we kind of went down the branding track. And I want to get back to more of the organizational aspects because branding is definitely a part of organization, right? It's like making sure that you have a consistent system across your various social media and platforms and things. What are some of the other ways that what are some of the other systems that you recommend authors have in place to get themselves organized?
Yeah. So I kind of break it down into like four pieces of a pie, right? Like, pie charts. So, like, on one piece, there's the writing piece. So, like, how do you plot your books? How do you find your inspiration? When an idea strikes you, like my husband with his like Western fantasy idea, where are you storing like that data, that info, so you don't forget it later, right? So, keeping all your writing aspects organized. Do you have like a motion thesaurus that you go to frequently and you're constantly Googling it, like putting that in your bookmarks, things like that. Anything involved with like the creation of your books, that's like the writing systems you want to establish. The next is the publishing piece. So that's like getting your book on KDP or using draft to digital. But before that, you have all these other steps you have to take, right? Like you have to have a cover, you have to have your book description, your ISBN, your metadata, so keywords, categories. How do you go about that? Do you have a checklist for that process? Like, I worked with an author one time who, before she hired me, she had a big launch and she was so focused on like the print cover being perfect and like that making sure it looked how she wanted it to look that 3 days before her launch, she realized she forgot to get an ebook cover. And so, like how do you make sure you don't miss any of those crucial steps with the publishing aspect? The next is, so having your system with that. The next is your marketing piece of the pie. So social media, newsletters, book promotion sites. Are you going to book signings, conventions, bookmarks, any marketing material you might have? I mean, there's so many amazing ways we can market our books these days, right? And so it's easy to feel spread thin across your marketing because maybe you don't have like two or three marketing channels that you're driving traffic to your books with. So, do you have a system for your Facebook ads, right? So, when you sit down to create a new ad, you don't feel like you're starting from scratch all the time, or you avoid it because you don't have like a checklist or a proper process of creating your ads, right? And then the last piece of the pie is admin. So that's like the not so fun stuff like project management, keeping track of your finances, like what money's coming into the business, what money's going out of the business. How are you going to budget for your next launch? Can you afford an assistant at this point? Tax time, tracking your expenses, all that fun admin aspect of things, right? Like what softwares are we using? Do you want to use Notion, Trello, Asana, ClickUp, that aspect of it as well? Just kind of documenting and storing everything for your books. Like I know some people said they use Excel, and I've worked with some authors that use Excel for their world building and for like their character creation because it's so easy to be like, I wrote in chapter 3 this character has blue eyes, but then in chapter 46 you said they have brown eyes. Like, which one is it? Because it's so easy to forget those details, right? So having a way where you can like go back and easily access, like, oh yeah, this character does have brown eyes. Like I messed it up in chapter 2. Just making your thought process easier and lessening what I call decision fatigue. And I did not make that term up. Like I'm sure some thought guru out there made it up, but it's like you get exhausted making decisions over and over and over again. Like, what t-shirt am I going to wear today? What am I going to eat for dinner? Should I do Facebook ads? Should I like do newsletter swaps? Okay, I got to launch my book. Like, what worked well last time? What didn't work well? Should I do this XYZ? And you want your energy to go towards writing, right? And towards like creating your books and writing your books. Like that's where you want your energy to go to. And a lot of times when you have systems and processes in place, you've already like pre-made those decisions in a sense, where it's like, okay, cool. I have my checklist here. I know exactly what I need to get done and exactly, what I need to accomplish today when I sit down at my desk. Because, gosh, as authors, like you are juggling so much. And I always tell authors, like, if it feels hard, it's because it is hard. Like you're doing a lot. So, kind of a long answer to that question, but that is kind of how I break things down primarily. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There is so much going on. So you mentioned some of those tools there, like Asana, Trello, Excel. Are there any ones that you specifically recommend to authors for them to use? Or is it more just like find whatever is comfortable for you and then do those things?
Yeah, so I'm all about whatever is easiest for you and works, like use it. Like if you do use Excel spreadsheets, there's no shame in that, right? Like if it works, it works. I will say at some point, if you want to scale, it can get a little cumbersome using those spreadsheets, right? And making sure like they're up to date and accurate. So my personal favorite is Notion. I adore Notion. I've used it for several years. When I worked with Dave at Kindlepreneur, I geeked out and was able to set up this entire content management system in it for his blog. I've used it with several authors to create like their launch plans. That's where we keep like all their world building. That's where we keep track of who's doing what tasks. And I love whatever you use. I always recommend creating templates. I have a Notion template I've made for indie authors. So it's kind of like a done for you. It's got everything you need, and you can go in and customize it to your heart's delight. But anything and everything you need to run an author business, I've created some templates in that Notion template. But whatever you use, like create templates, and that way you can just copy and paste that template anytime you have a new book, a new project, or a new aspect of publishing, like Facebook ads, for instance. And I love Asana, I love Trello, and there's some people they hate Notion, they hate Asana, they hate Trello. They're like, my brain does not function while using this, and that's okay. Like, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your brain. You have to find what works best for you. And for me, that's Notion. And for a lot of my authors, clients working with them, Notion is a really great place to start. I have other clients though that hate any and all project management software. And so we use other ways to help keep them on track and to help keep me on track too with tasks or their assistant or whomever, whatever tasks they're doing. Something's better than nothing, right? So even okay, it's a paper planner. Amazing. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as you feel like you can scale with that to the level of scale you want to, go for it. Like, don't let anyone shame you for that because that's what works best for you and your brain and for your team. So, yeah.
Yeah. Um, since you do work in Notion with a lot of your clients, I am curious, like what is the I have not used Notion myself. I would probably just go open an Excel spreadsheet just because that's what I'm most familiar with myself, right?
Yeah.
Um, what would what would be a good reason to use Notion though? Like what value does it provide outside of some of the other things that people might use?
Yeah. So, okay, this is so dumb, but for me, honestly, it's pretty. And I'm one of those people, if it's not cute or pretty, I'm not going to use it. Like, I've always had to have pretty planners, pretty notebooks, because if it's not cute, like, I don't want it in my life, right? So I love Notion, how customizable it is. And it kind of is like, it's funny someone mentioned three-ring binders because it reminds me of having a three-ring binder in school. Like, I don't know if anyone else had the big three-ring binder. And then for each subject, you had like a tab in there, right? So you had like your math tab, your English tab, your health class tab, or whatever. And so I kind of look at Notion like that, where it's like, okay, we can have our marketing tab here, we can have like the writing tab here, expense tracker here, and you can build databases within Notion, which I have found a lot of authors to find helpful with not just keeping track of tasks, but kind of like what I mentioned before with keeping track of book ideas. So you can have like a database template and you can have like your book ideas in a database and make it super easy to just pull those from like one part of Notion to another when you're starting to work on that book. I love that you can easily share it with people. And it kind of is like it's there's a learning curve to it. So I always warn people with using Notion. If you haven't used a project management software before, it can be a little difficult to figure out at first. And I always, honestly, I recommend people use like Trello if you've never used a project management system before, because it is like a big bulletin board and you're moving sticky notes with details on that bulletin board. But if you do want to try Notion, I always recommend, okay, what is the aspect of your author business that feels the most stressful to you? So is it like planning launches and okay, we're going to pick our launch date and we're going to reverse engineer from there what all needs to happen to make this launch successful, right? So I need to have the draft done by this time. I need to have my editor have their edits back by this time. I need to have it uploaded to KDP a week before launch, like whatever your launch process is. You could start there, for instance, and then as you feel comfortable, build out more pieces within Notion. And there's so many lovely, amazing YouTube tutorials out there on it now because it's very popular with a lot of like university and college students. I envy them. I wish I had Notion when I was in college. Like I would have ruled the world. But we didn't even have like iPads or anything back then yet. So yeah, so I see someone in the comments says, is Notion similar to OneNote? Similar but more powerful. And I will say too that Notion has lots of AI features. Now, I know some authors are wary of AI, but there are a lot of powerful AI features that they're introducing into Notion as well. But you don't have to use those AI features to use Notion. It's more in the sense of like, you can go in there and say, can you please write me a checklist for Facebook ads, like creating Facebook ads, and it will use AI to like create that checklist for you. It's super powerful and they're constantly improving it, which I really appreciate about them. Some project management softwares, they just kind of like release it and then don't really do anything with it. They don't add new features or try to improve it. I've not found that to be the case with Notion. They're constantly improving it. Anytime I've had questions or issues, they're very responsive. I think primarily its customization features is great. You can really make it however you need it to work for you. I also like that you can have different team spaces. So I use it for my work and my personal life. So I have a horse. I'm a big horse girl, horse person. I just bought a horse in July, and I'm using Notion to track like the holes I found in my horse's training. So standing tied, lining up at the mounting block, and I was like, I'm going to use Notion to keep track of all this because I forget like what holes are in the training that I need to go back and work on. So I've started using it for that, and it's just the best. It's my favorite.
That's super helpful. Yeah, I do feel like one of the things that you didn't necessarily say, but it sounds like Notion can be sort of a one-stop shop for organizing everything, which is really nice as opposed to having things spread out across, I've got an Excel document with this info here,
Yeah.
I've got a Word document with this info over here, I've got, sticky notes plastered everywhere, and because
Mm.
I feel like part of it a lot of times it's just that your organizational system needs organization because it's just you've got things in a bunch of different
Yeah.
places and you're doing all this context switching between them because you're like, now I need to remember where did I store the
Yes.
info that I had, like where did I store my character Bible or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like did I use Trello for that or did I use Notion or did I use whatever? It sounds
Yes.
like Notion can sort of act as that one-stop shop where you can keep everything organized, which is really nice.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I will say too, another tip is spend time each week, like put time on your calendar to do a little bit of project management within whatever tool you're using because it's super easy to like set it up and then never look at it ever again. So you have to make it like accessible for you, but then also too like I always put time on my calendar to review like do I need to clean this up, update this, especially when you're working with team members. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel like that is one of the things where a lot of times people will set up these organizational systems, and you get this real feeling of accomplishment from setting up the organizational system.
yeah.
And then you're like, I did it. I got
Yes.
organized. And then like 3 weeks later, you're back to your like mess of whatever's you've got going on.
Mhm.
Never actually kept the thing up to date.
Yeah.
So I do feel like that is very important for sure. Someone
Yeah.
someone
I
says
mean,
organization dopamine. I feel
and
like there's yeah.
it's the same feeling as when you start a new year and you buy a planner and you're like,
Mhm.
yeah, this is gonna be the year I use a planner, but then you like kind of set it up, but then you forget it. Like I always used to tell people, like you have to keep it on your desk or like wherever you are, like on your kitchen table if you're like a stay-at-home mom, like keep it accessible and there and like actually utilize it because yeah, Trello, Notion, Asana, they can very much become like that paper planner that you just kind of, it's July and I still haven't used it. Well, what's the point, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to talking a little bit more in depth about like a book launch specifically, because that's one of the key areas where a lot of authors need and want a lot of organization, and it can be extremely valuable for authors who are looking to use some sort of organizer as a place to start. And so that can get you into the habit of actually using whatever system you've got set up because it's like I did the thing, now I need to go check it off wherever I wrote that down, right? So whether that's
Yeah.
Notion or Excel or what have you. But what do you recommend authors have on their book launch checklist?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of at least having 3 months, like from the time your book is finished. I know every author, though, is different. Like some authors write a book a month and they will release 12 books a year, right? Other authors, though, like they might release one book every 6 months. So that's kind of why I love the idea of you pick your launch date and you reverse engineer from there. So every author's launch process is different, but for sure, it kind of goes back to that pie of the piece of the pie, right? Like, okay, so if I want to launch my book December 1st, I need to have it on KDP by like 3 days before. So that means I need to have it done November 20, whatever. I don't remember how many days are in November, but so that's okay, that's a date I need to have things done and ready by. It needs, okay, so I need to be proofread or edited by and formatted by this date. And sometimes that starts to stress people out, but I always encourage people like look at it as like a step up the ladder, right? So like each part of the process is just one step up the ladder. You're not going to do all of this in 1 week or 1 day. It's going to be a little at a time. And I love the idea of reverse engineering too, and just the process of that because it helps authors when they sit down at their desk, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm launching a book. I have so many things to do right now." It's like, "No, this week I'm focusing on setting up my book promotions, right? So, I'm going to have, I'm going to have it be 99 cents for the week launch week and I'm going to have it be promoted on FreeBooksy and Hello Books or whatever your process looks like for that." I love doing social media countdown posts and just like building hype, like especially if you have something like a Facebook group and making it fun. Like I know a lot of authors will do giveaways, like counting down the week of their launch because that gets more traffic, that gets more hype, more engagement with your posts, looking at planning out those aspects of your social media, asking other authors to mention your book in your genre, especially if you have like author friends that you cross promote your books with, asking them, "Hey, I've got my launch coming up. Would you be willing to give my book a shout out on this day?" 9 times out of 10, authors are like, "Absolutely, yes." Like, especially if you know them, they're more than happy to do that. And then, two, like your ARC team, right? So, advanced reader copies, getting like those ready and building your ARC team and building your ARC team process. Like, when do you need to communicate with your ARC team? Are you going to do something fun and like reveal your cover to them first to make it feel a little more exclusive and then reveal it in your Facebook group and then post it on social media, right? So there's like obviously the essentials, like you have to have the draft ready, you have to have it edited, you have to have your cover, you have to build hype for it. But again, like the marketing is so different for every genre and every author. And I shouldn't say every genre, like we all know Facebook ads can be an effective way to market your but it's not the only way to market your book, especially like building hype, getting pre-orders. Are you going to build hype on TikTok? Okay, we need to sit down and I need to batch create 7 TikToks every Sunday for the next week, right? So, whatever your process looks like, reverse engineer from your launch date and having that checklist for each aspect of your author business can kind of make sure you fill all the gaps and you build that hype that you need to for launch day, getting reviews, getting sales, all the fun things, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, there is a lot to be done with getting your launch set up between cross promotions, getting reviewers, all that different stuff. And it's something that's going to evolve as well as you progress, right? As you release more books, you're going to get a little bit more of a system down.
Yeah.
Um, and someone asked, would you recommend for someone who's a debut author to get a virtual assistant, or would you wait until they're a little bit more established? Like at what point do you think that a virtual assistant can be valuable to an author?
Yeah, I mean, if you can afford it from day one, like it's incredible to have the help. And again, like if you can get an assistant that is familiar with the publishing process and just the, author world as a whole, that's invaluable as well. But if you can't afford it, then that's okay, and be thinking about what things you would love to delegate someday to an assistant and start creating those systems for your assistant, having them documented so that way, when you do bring on an assistant, they're able to be set up for success and they're not kind of thrown into the dumpster fire of like, well, I think this is in Google this Google Doc and I'm gonna forward you this email. It has this information. And then like I always joke with people, I'm used to being thrown into the chaos. Like it's very normal, but if you can create a little bit of system before you bring on an assistant, that's amazing. And again, like, if you can afford it, just look at establish your budget because it can get expensive quickly. And I always recommend to when you hire an assistant, it's not necessarily you're hiring someone to create a return on your investment, right? So if you hire an assistant for $500 a month, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make $500 more dollars a month in sales. Really, what you're getting a return on is your time. So saving the time of what do I post on social media, saving the time of lurking through Facebook groups trying to find newsletter swaps, saving you the time of getting your Facebook ads set up and running, reporting, monitoring them, tracking them, all that fun Facebook ad stuff. It really is like a investment on your time. But of course, like as you grow and scale, your assistant should be able to pay for themselves pretty quickly, and you should be getting a return on your investment, and they can be invaluable to you as in your business. So that's kind of how I encourage people to approach hiring assistants, because sometimes you might get sticker shock. There's some assistants out there that charge $15 an hour. There's some that do like packages, social media packages, where it's like for $400 a month, I will post on your Instagram 3 times a week. It really just depends on your budget and where you're at. And don't feel like though you have to have an assistant from the get-go to be successful. Like lots of authors will build their audiences and they'll find a reader who's very engaged, they're very active, and sometimes they'll even say, "Hey, would you be willing to come on and help me monitor the Facebook group and respond to emails?" And they'll work something out from there. But yeah, so there's a couple questions in the chat I see really quick. Um, so someone says they have a friend who would make a great author assistant, and do I have recommendations on how to learn the field and get started? So I think I always say niche is quiche. So if you can niche down in a genre, like that is fantastic. If you love fantasy books, like go study all the fantasy authors out there. What are they doing that's working? What skills do you need to learn? Do you need to learn some project management skills, marketing skills, graphic design, Canva, and then start pitching to authors and just say, "Hey, like here's who I am. I'm an avid reader, big fan of fantasy books. And I'd love to, if you need help, let me know. I'm offering assistant services." That's always a great way to start. And you really do just have to put yourself out there and let people know, like, here's how I can help you, right? But yeah, I think if you're someone who has great organization skills, you're responsive, that's huge. You don't wait 10 days to respond to emails, you respond pretty quickly. That's really a key asset for being an assistant. And you're proactive. You're not like reactive to things. You're proactively looking for like what are going to be some of the blocks we might have in this project? What are going to be some of the issues we might have? That's also a great asset to have an assistant as well, for sure. But yeah, I think there's a couple more questions here in the chat. Oh, Tony asked, how should you vet them? So if it's someone new, you can always ask them for references. And a lot of times established assistants will have current clients or previous clients that you can ask for their contact information, and you can say, "Hey, I'm thinking about hiring this person. Can you let me know about their experience?" Because hiring an assistant is a lot. And I always tell my assistants that I train, like, this is this person's baby. Like this is their business, is they have put in blood, sweat, and tears to build this. It takes a lot of building trust to become a really solid assistant with a client. You see them through the highs and the lows, and you are right there with them. And I think too, like it's always a good idea to give them a small paid project. If you're like just not sure and starting out, saying, "Hey, here's a small project. Here's like the rate I'm offering," and see how they do with that small project, right? And typically, like that's you can see right away if they're a good fit or not from a small project like that. I do a 3-month trial with my VAs. So, we assign them to a client, we pair them up depending on their personality, because that's huge too. Like, do your personalities jive? Do they have good communication skills? And does your assistant have the skill sets that you need? Or are they willing to learn? Like, I always encourage my assistants too. If a client asks you, like, "Hey, would you be willing to help me with, maybe setting up my welcome sequence?" and you haven't done that before, you can always be honest and say, I haven't done that before. However, I would be more than happy to research this, see what other welcome sequences do authors have, what other YouTube tutorials, videos are there out there, and then say, I'd love to add this skill set to my tool belt, right? And because not every assistant's going to know how to do all the things. And so if you're willing to be patient with your assistant and give them time and space to learn some of these things, they can be honestly an incredible asset to building your author business in that sense. So, yeah, vetting is important, and just making sure that they're a good fit for you in the long term, not just short term. Because if you can find that solid assistant that you've been with, that you can be with for years and years, like that is invaluable for sure for building your author business. Because Brandon Sanderson, I don't know how many team members he has now, but he has a ton. So, and he has not done it alone. He has not built his empire alone. He's had lots of help from lots of team members over the years. And if you don't want to scale to that level, that's okay. Like I know lots of authors who just have one part-time assistant and that's all they need. You know, they might have like a cover designer or a formatter that they work with, but they have one solid assistant that really helps them run a lot of things behind the scenes, and you can grow with them from that and just keep it at that level too and be perfectly content as well. So, yeah.
And someone else asked, where do you find assistants that are familiar with indie publishing? Because you could probably go, and just search, on some marketplace for assistants or something like that. But a lot
Yeah.
of them are not going to be familiar with publishing or,
Yeah.
how all of the various workflows that authors need, which are usually a little bit different from what most assistants are used to working with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's agencies out there, like I have an agency. You are going to pay a little more with an agency because they kind of typically will add on like a finder's fee aspect where they have already vetted the assistants and they have already like made sure they're really solid, they're a good fit. A lot of times they'll have training done by the company. But otherwise, you can just start asking around in your genre. Again, especially if you can find an assistant that's familiar with your genre, that's so great because they already know like what's working, what's not working. They're familiar with other authors. They can connect you with other authors. So there's lots of Facebook groups out there too. Like I know sometimes there's like genre specific author Facebook groups that you can post in and say, "Hey, I'm looking for an assistant. Here's what I need help with. Here's my budget. Does anyone know of anyone or can you recommend someone?" And I know lots of authors have found really great assistance through that. You can ask in your audience if you want, hey, here's what I need help with. Does anyone out there? Because then they're already familiar with your books and that's great, right? So yeah, there's a couple different places, but again, like vetting them and making sure they're a really good fit in the long term is going to be super key and save you lots of headaches in the future. But yeah, just ask around, like ask other authors, ask in Facebook groups. Those are really great places to start, especially if you're on a budget and you can't afford to spend quite a bit. That's always a good spot to start. And you can hire an assistant too for 10 hours a month. It doesn't have to be like a part-time employee. All my clients, we start you with a lot of times we start at 10 hours a month. Anything less than that, I mean, in my experience, doesn't really move the needle in your business necessarily. But 10 hours a month, okay, that's 2.5 hours a week if you want to break it down and look at it like that. That's 2.5 hours you could be writing. That's 2.5 hours you could be spending time with your family. That's 2.5 hours you could be learning Facebook ads, whatever that is. However you want to spend that time. That's always like a good place to start is small increments of those hours each month and then kind of moving up from there as you scale and grow.
So, what are some of the common points of failure that you see when an author hires a VA and they're like just getting started that and it doesn't go anywhere or it doesn't work out?
Yeah, I think one is unrealistic expectations. So that's why I always tell people like look at it as an investment in your time and return on your time, not necessarily like a return on your investment. So if you hire an assistant and they start posting every day for you on social media and you don't really see sales move that much, then it's like, well, is it the assistant? Is it your guys' strategy? Is it just the algorithm? That's why social media and I have a love-hate relationship. It can be very powerful and it can be very detrimental as well, especially time-wise. But yeah, I think setting up your assistant for success with just, I mean, put yourself in their shoes, right? Whenever you go to a new job and they're like, well, we need help with this. And you're like, okay. And there's no like direction or specificity, I guess you could say, on like, here's the steps on how to do this, or here's exactly how I want things done. Here are my preferences. that is so helpful for setting your assistant up for success. And I think too, giving parameters, like when we bring on a new client, I always say like the first month is your assistant learning your preferences. So what's important to you, what's not important to you, right? Like I have a client, her name's Marion Roach Smith. She has a journalism background. She used to write for the New York Times. One of the things I found out in the first month working with her, we've worked together for 7 or 8 years now, is we never ever use exclamation points in any copy ever. Newsletters, emails, we never use exclamation points because in journalism, like that's her background. That's how she presents herself. She teaches people how to write memoir. We do not use exclamation points. So, things like that that are in your head that you don't realize are important to you until you start working with someone, that's really important to establish that with your assistant as well. Like, for instance, when I was an executive assistant, I would book travel quite a bit for my clients, right? So they'd have to go to speaking gigs or conferences. And I would ask them, where do you prefer to set out on the plane? And they would say, oh, the window seat or oh, the aisle seat, right? Like that's preferences that you have that you don't necessarily know until you have someone start to help you. So you always have to realize like there is going to be a little bit of training, a little bit of guidance. But if you pay for an assistant that's pretty well established, they usually know what questions to ask to get that information out of you on like, what is your how do we want to respond to reader emails? How do we want to respond to Facebook posts? How do we want to, all those preferences again that you have in your head that you don't know until you're working with someone. It's kind of like when you get married, right? And it's like you have these expectations of each other that you don't realize until you start living together. And it's like, well, the husband always takes out the trash, but then it's like, no, I never take out the trash. All those like fun, weird things. It kind of is the same when you hire an assistant, realizing like what expectations you have of each other and how are you going to communicate. Are you going to communicate via Facebook Messenger, Slack, WhatsApp, email? Like all of those fun things are really like that first month of working together is just learning about each other and your assistant learning about you and your business. So having patience with them is so key and investing some guidance into them can really go a long ways with working with an assistant for sure.
And one of the other key areas where I feel like having an assistant can be helpful or having organizational systems in place can be helpful is dealing with burnout. Have you had clients that have experienced burnout, and what does that look like, and how do you help them through that?
Yeah, so a lot of times, I have a soft spot in my heart for entrepreneurs who experience this because a lot of times people will come to us when they are just like at their wits' end and they're like, I need to keep going. This is how I feed my family, but I just have nothing left. I've got to hire help. And so I always again start like with the onboarding call. We always start with what are your top three tasks that are stressing you out? So is it your inbox that's stressing you out? Is it like your social media is stressing you out? Is it like you've got a launch coming up and you have nothing done for it and we need to quick put together a launch plan? Like sit down and think about what is stressing you out and what can you start offloading off your plate onto someone else's plate and start delegating. And also, too, sometimes it means like skipping things. Like sometimes, when I work with entrepreneurs, they'll go and speak at a lot of conferences. Sometimes it means pulling back on doing those things so you can have a season. And I always really emphasize like pulling back is just a season. This is not forever. We need to pull back a little bit, get some like base foundational things established again, like, sales, communication, customer service, whatever that is. And then we can start to ramp up and scale again, but scale at a healthy, sustainable pace because it's, especially with authors, it's very easy to get burnout. You're juggling so much. And that's again why with marketing, I always recommend have 2 or 3 ways of getting traffic to your book. Don't feel like you have to do all the things all the time because it can be exhausting and it can be expensive too, especially with things like Amazon ads or Facebook ads. Maybe you need to pull back on Facebook ads for a little bit and we need to focus on more organic ways of getting traffic, like posting on social media or posting in Facebook groups, things like that. Yeah, that's kind of we'll take it down to the basics, see what we need to pull back on, see what they're stressed out about, and kind of create like a little bit of a crisis intervention plan, I guess you could say, to get them back up and running and healthy. So, yeah, I've seen it a lot with entrepreneurs, a lot with authors specifically as well.
Yeah, it is a constant barrage of you're doing so many different things and being pulled in so many different directions, and there's stuff you just don't have time to do sometimes, and yeah, it can be stressful for sure. This has been so helpful. Lorna, we're at the close of the hour here. If people want to follow up and have other questions that they didn't get answered during our chat here, where can people go to get more answers?
Yeah, so I have lots of free checklists on my website because I'm a checklist girly. So if you go to www.lornakbailey.com, you have to make sure you put in the K because if you just Google Lorna Bailey, a famous UK artist pops up and she makes dog and cat pottery. I'm not kidding you. So that has been the bane of my existence with my branding is, it seems pretentious that everything's Lorna K. Bailey, but that is because there's another Lorna Bailey out there ruling the internet already. So she makes gorgeous pottery. I hope someday to meet her if I ever make it to the UK because we have the same name. But yes, www.lornakbailey.com. That is the best place to go. I have a systems checklist you guys can sign up for. It's completely free. You are added to my email list, but I always try to make sure my emails are super practical, helpful, not fluffy, very much like this is what I see going on in the industry. Here's like what I think are best practices. Here's a helpful tip. I always try to make sure it's not a waste of your time because time is precious, right? So yeah, www.lornakbailey. Thank you, Marlene. She put it in the chat there if folks want to check it out. But yeah, that's where I primarily hang out. I do sometimes post on TikTok. I'm not super consistent there. But yeah, and seriously, guys, email me if you have any questions, any like, hey, do you have recommendations or tips for this? You can email me through my website or lorna@lornakbailey.com. And I love to chat with you guys. I really enjoy authors and working with them, and I feel super lucky to work with them, and it's a really cool thing we get to do for work. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone else, for coming out as well. And if anyone has any questions on Story Origin, you're also always welcome to email me, Evan at storyoriginApp.com. Lorna, thanks again so much for coming and chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you all in the next one.